Our panel moderator is the CEO at the Royal Academy of Engineering and Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering Foundation. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Hayaatun Sillem and her expert panel.
Well, good morning and welcome to this session, which, as you've just heard, is focused on how we can learn from wider engineering experience in order to inform the development of an AI safety culture. As part of the Academy's blog series on responsible AI, which you can find on our website, we've been speaking to a whole range of experts in our community about those opportunities and risks posed by AI. And we've heard about things you'd expect, like disruption to elections and concerns about bias, and of course, the rapidly changing nature of work. But we've also seen real excitement about the opportunities for advances in healthcare and for new tools to turbocharge our creativity and productivity. So to enable us to harness those benefits in safe and equitable ways, our community is really keen to ensure that we can share our learning from engineering and the methods, the institutions, and the cultures in engineering that have helped us to embed safety in hopefully everything that we do. We've got a brilliant panel to help us do this. We've got John McDermid, Professor of Software Engineering at University of York. We've got Katerina Spranger, Founder and CEO of Oxford Heartbeat. We've got Rashik, Parmar, CEO of the BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. So John, I'm going to start with you, and I'd like to ask you about the engineering tools that can help us to mitigate the risks posed by our AI. And I was at Kamala Harris's speech yesterday, and I was really struck by her point that whilst we often think about existential risk as kind of frontier risk, in fact, the risks that we're seeing today are already existential for people who are directly impacted by them. So I'm interested in your thoughts on whether we need different approaches to manage those immediate risks and those existential risks that we might face in the future.
Okay, so thank you, Hayaatun. Now, I'll start with the more immediate risks. And actually, there are many engineering contributions to this, but I'm going to focus on those techniques used for engineering critical systems, particularly those that impact human safety. So it's common in safety engineering to identify potential hazards, ways in which people might be harmed, and then to find means to eliminate those hazards or to control them in order to reduce risk. We can do exactly the same with AI and ML. We need to consider a wider range of harms, not just physical impact on people. So discrimination if people are applying for loans, misdiagnosis of a medical system, and so on. But in doing this work, we need to understand the way in which the systems can fail. An obvious example is false negatives. If I'm talking about something, looking at images for cancerous cells and they miss those, then somebody will not get the relevant treatment. Similarly, if I miss seeing a pedestrian in an autonomous driving vehicle, then there's a risk that they will be hit. This is not exactly what happened with the fatality in Tempe, Arizona with the Uber test vehicle, but shows the nature of the problem that can arise. And so another safety engineering practice that I'd really recommend is the idea of a safety case or an assurance case, which is an argument supported by evidence which demonstrates the system is safe enough to deploy in a given context. We can do this for AI and ML too, regardless of the nature of the application, and that I would really recommend. And a further contribution from this area is the idea of a safety management system, set of organizations, procedures, processes, and so on, for managing the safety of systems in operation. But that also includes dealing with anomalies, incidents, and accidents, and so on. So again, this can be done for AI and ML. And it needs to, I say, focus on how we deal with failures in operation as well as normal operation. So whilst I don't know for sure, I suspect that the problems crews have had in San Francisco leading to their license for operation being suspended stems from the fact that they haven't sufficiently thought through the way of managing operational failures and hence ended up dragging somebody 20 feet underneath the vehicle. So all of this is concerned with immediate risk. If I look at the longer term, the more existential risk, well, I have to say I'm not completely convinced that there really is existential risk from AGI. It actually still depends on how humans use it. But let's consider foundation models or frontier models such as ChatGPT. So what would I do? Actually, I'd just apply the same set of principles, but we'd actually find them harder to apply. I think we discovered that it would be really difficult to produce adequate safety cases or safety management because of the lack of visibility or the transparency of the systems. Although it would be interesting to explore that in more detail. But if I'm right about those problems, then we should avoid deploying this class of systems in critical applications where they could do a very great deal of harm. I would also say that there's merit in considering the precautionary principle, where we don't deploy systems until we can develop enough evidence, enough scientific and engineering data to support their deployment. And I think that's particularly pertinent because actually the developers really can't fully tell you how these systems behave. So those would be the main lessons I would take from engineering.
Thank you. So the principles definitely are still relevant, but they may not be that easy to implement in practice. Rashik, let me turn to you. We've obviously seen this huge uptick in awareness of AI over the past year or so. But of course, AI isn't a new technology, albeit that the scale and potential of new models make them much more accessible and powerful. So I'm interested in your views on how the professional institutions can respond to this step change that we're living through and that's likely to go on for some time.
Absolutely, and as you say, AI isn't new. It goes back to the early 60s, and we've been building AI capabilities in systems for a long time. And ultimately, we've got to help the engineers, the professionals who are building these systems have the right kind of expertise, have competence, so we know that they're able to build those systems in a way which both serves a purpose but does that safely, in a way in which we can understand what the kind of outcomes are. We can understand that these will be systems that we can trust, that we can depend on. Right? So these concerns are kind of fundamental to what we're trying to do here. And what we've been doing within the Institute is building out what we refer to as responsible computing, which is a framework which takes a lot of the kind of techniques that John's talked about and draws out a set of best practices that people can use. So what does a responsible data center look like? How do we think about the infrastructure that goes in that data center? How do we think about the coding practices that ensures that that code is both applicable for the purpose, but also covers some of those unintended consequences, some of those use cases, the safety use cases, as we talked about earlier. And then data use, making sure that we've got the right data sources. So we've thought about bias, we've thought about transparency, we've thought about all the other concerns that can lead to consequences that this system isn't fit for purpose in the future. And it's about making sure those systems are future ready. And from our perspective, we've got tremendous opportunity to do this in a way which not only helps our professionals be effective at building systems in a faster, more efficient way than others, but also do it in a way which differentiates the UK workforce from the rest of the workforce. You know, this kind of Silicon Valley culture of break it and then figure out how to fix it later may have worked in the past. We don't feel that's appropriate for the future. So how do we build a culture of excellence and quality in our technologies in a way in which professionals can feel proud about building the systems that solve those societal issues? That's, I think, what we've got to try and do. And I think there's a huge opportunity to do that now and into the future. And I think part of working with the academy, with people at the institutes like the BCS, gives opportunity for us to come together and surface those best practices.
So it's taking those hallmarks of professionalism and engineering around responsibility and accountability and making them real and practical in the context of AI. Well, that brings me nicely on to, Katerina, a question that I have for you. Unfortunately, those of us who work in engineering are all too aware that there are historic instances of innovation that has failed to consider adequately the diverse needs in society. For example, the many examples of gender bias that we have seen in product design. So Oxford Heartbeat creates safety-critical innovation in healthcare. So what do you do to make sure that this works for all users?
Thank you. It's an extremely important question. So at Oxford Heartbeat, we develop technology, AI technology, that helps making surgeries safer. And it focuses on a particular type of minimally invasive surgery, brain surgery, with an implantation of devices inside blood vessels. And I remember in the early days, actually, I was researching the sort of the history of minimally invasive cardiovascular surgery, and I was struck by the fact that in the early days of that novel minimally invasive surgery, as opposed to the old-fashioned open surgery, for a long time, the patient population was largely male, and not only because these diseases are, yes, statistically more prevalent in male parts of the population, but also because the early implants were actually developed for male anatomies and were too big to fit female body. So for decades, it took decades for industry to catch up and actually develop so-called low-profile devices that would fit smaller female morphologies. So that is a bad example. So what do we do not to repeat those mistakes? We use a lot of data to develop our technology, to test it, and to validate it. And we put a lot of effort to make sure that that pool of data we are using is representative, truly representative for a patient population of the conditions we are dealing with. So we are sourcing data from different hospitals, different patient demographics, different geographies to really make sure that it's truly representative. And then when we test our technology and validate it and report on its accuracy, for example, of our simulations, we look for all those potentially hidden trends, whether the technology is underperforming potentially for certain types of demographics, or underperforming or overperforming. So we're looking for those trends to really catch those potential dangers. And interestingly, the technology is now out in Europe. It's used in Europe and in the UK. And now we are preparing, and so it was tested on kind of European population, if you want. And then we are preparing for the US launch, and we need to obtain FDA approval to do that. And interestingly, to obtain the FDA approval, one of the requirements is to either demonstrate that the European population, is equivalent to the US population, because our technology was tested kind of in Europe. So you either demonstrate the equivalence of population, or if you can't, then you need to test it on the US population as well. So this is an example of how frameworks, regulators can provide those safety nets to catch this kind of potential hazards that we don't experience them down the line.
Brilliant. That's really encouraging to hear the care that's going into that. I'd like to switch slightly now to the topic of how on earth we create trust and confidence in this rather hot market. So, Rashik, if we're out there trying to purchase an AI system, what can we do in terms of markers of trust that will help users to navigate the market?
Yeah, this is a really big question. It's one that we've been thinking about a lot. And I'm going to start with a real story. So I had the pleasure of fortune of talking to some of the people who worked on Cambridge Analytica systems. And we talked to them about why they built those technologies and did the engineers understand the consequences of what they were doing. And every one of the engineers we talked to said, we fully understood what was happening. We knew that this would certainly influence decisions that we didn't want to be influencing. And we challenged our executives to say, we shouldn't be doing this. Right? The executive response was quite simple. It was, well, if you don't want to do it, then you know where the door is, and we'll find somebody else to do it. And that experience, which was really indelible in my memory for a long time. I was kind of thinking through, well, what do we do here? Because obviously the professionals wanted to do the right thing. And I think that's an important thing to remember. Engineers and professionals typically understand the consequences of what they're doing and want to do the right thing. So giving them the best practice is good. It's important. Having all that learning that people like John and all professors and academics do is great. But unless we can have other mechanisms that can do the regulation, the governance, it's not going to be enough. Right? So how do we hold the executives to account? That's a big question, right? And that's where we're working with the organization like the Financial Conduct Authority and saying, how do we build accountability standards for the executives so that we can have that kind of control? So in that case with Cambridge Analytica, should some of those executives be called out earlier and have mechanisms in place which regulated what they were doing and make sure they understood the consequences of what their decisions were. Right? And that's what we've got to do industry by industry. It's not that there isn't regulation to do that. There is a lot of regulation for this. Right? often we don't know how to use that regulation, we don't know how to apply that regulation, and we don't have the whistleblowing structures in place to be able to allow engineers to raise those concerns in the right kind of way. You know, can we, for example, work with the Standards Institute to build a kite mark for those technologies? And would that kite mark stand for something which is significant enough, based on a set of standards and principles, maybe responsible computing as a framework as a set of standards and principles, and have some assurance mechanisms around that, as you do with accounting assurance. That assurance would ensure that the systems that were built use those principles, and they're being used in a complete and a rigorous way, and they can be awarded a kite mark to say, this is something which is a system that you can trust because it's inclusive, it's free from bias, it provides transparency in the decisions it's making, it's got a data set which was fully inclusive. You know, there's probably a whole bunch of other principles we can put in place, but those principles then gives us confidence as consumers of that system, of society at large, that those are really good pieces of technology that we can adopt. And we from the BCS believe that there's an opportunity for the UK to really take a lead here. So when I take a look at what's happening with the AI Safety Summit, you know, can we come out with that and have these kite marks which show that these technologies are ones which are really ones that can be trusted, and can we use that to do something which creates a kind of brand for the UK? And we refer to that as coded in Britain. So if you think about, you know, in the 60s and 70s and maybe in the 80s, Made in Britain stood for something. Can coded in Britain stand for something? And can it be something which we as engineers in the UK can all feel proud of, because we've created something that not only solves societal issues and is fit for the future, but is there in a way which is trusted and provides confidence that we can use this.
So it's safety and trust actually is the basis of competitive advantage.
Correct.
Interesting framing. And I also, it was interesting that you referred to the kind of collision between professionalism and ethics and commercial pressures. And that's, again, something we see in other areas of engineering, the Boeing Air Max, the Volkswagen emission scandals. You know, these are examples of where individuals may have fully understood the consequences, but may have felt they had no other choice. And that's partly about regulation, partly about culture as well. So,
exactly, and I think there's many other case studies across the whole engineering discipline that we can bring to bear here and say, this isn't a new set of problems. These problems have been there for a long time. Yeah. Let's learn from them, and let's use the structures and mechanisms and be mindful of applying them in the right way. We're not trying to stop innovation. Yeah. We're trying to make sure that the innovation solves the issues and creates a better society for all.
So, John, we've been quite enthusiastic so far about the opportunity to learn positive lessons from engineering. We have to have some humility here, don't we? Because engineering failures do happen. What can we learn from those in relation to this topic of AI safety?
Yeah, thanks. You're right. I mean, learning from experience, including failures, is really crucial as a way of avoiding, future incidents with similar signatures. But actually, this is achieved by design, not by luck. And let me give you an example which illustrates what I think are the challenges for AI. So, in December 2014, the UK air traffic control system stopped. They couldn't manage flights for about 9 hours in total. And I was invited in as one of the panel to review that. But actually, the software was designed to keep extremely detailed logs of what it was doing. And it mapped those logs actually back to the source code. So the engineers knew what the bug in the software was within 45 minutes, even though it was in a module that hadn't been touched for 20 years. That meant they could actually restart the system knowing how to avoid this bug, and therefore they could bring the system back up safely and successfully, and they did so. But if they just restarted it as it was, it would have failed again in exactly the same way, because it was a data-dependent bug. So this leads me to say, well, how could we, or indeed could we, do something similar, get similar insights for AI? And I don't know a good answer to that question, but really the broad issue here is, can we design systems, including AI, so they can be made resilient in order to recover from failures quickly and safely? And can we design them in such a way we can learn long-term lessons to avoid recurrence of similar problems? Perhaps slightly more prosaically, a general a design approach in critical systems is to use redundancy and diversity. So diversity, we design things different ways, so we expect them to fail in different ways, and you don't get the two parts of a system failing at the same time in very similar ways. So how might we do that with AI and ML? Well, one thing might be to train different models, but then to use things like explainability to expose the feature sets on which they're based to say, well, actually, these are using different characteristics of the problem to make decisions. Therefore, we can have some confidence they're not going to fail in similar ways. And, you know, but there are many possibilities for what are called common mode failures, things failing the same way. So if you use the same videos to train different systems for self-driving, they may well see the same features in those videos and go wrong the same way. So there's a lot of work to be done in this space to bring that understanding from, you know, general engineering into dealing with these sorts of problems. And so, you know, in general, what we need to do is to take these well-understood engineering principles that work very well. You look at the accident rates in aerospace and so on, and you realize it's a very, very mature way of designing systems. You need to understand how to achieve that in the context of a very, very fast evolving technology which we're faced with in AI and ML.
Thank you very much, John. That's really helpful to have those examples. Katerina, so the most powerful applications of AI, as is true for, I think, most innovation, often involve collaboration between different disciplines, different aspects of technology. We've held up the lens of engineering today. You sit at the intersection of engineering and health. What do you see as the significance of interdisciplinarity in all of this? And in your experience, what are the ingredients that make for great interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary working?
Great question. Yeah, we learned it the hard way, I have to say. So we work a lot with surgeons. They are the users of our technology. And the mindset of a clinical professional is very different from the mindset of an engineer, which, you know, it's normal. And sometimes we basically speak different languages. But this is where, as you say, Hayaatun, magic happens, where two kind of mindsets come together to solve crucial problems. So a few things I would say. A is communication from day one. If you're developing something in a multidisciplinary setting, communicating with the different parties from like before you even start building something or craft a project or work on anything, so that both parties or the parties really engage and feel ownership that it's truly a multidisciplinary project and every party is heard. So in our case, for example, before even building the technology, the first year of the company was all we did was just talking to surgeons. We talked to surgeons, everyone we could get our hands on. It was extremely challenging, I have to say, not only because surgeons are busy people, but also because there was nothing to show, right? Like at the beginning. So it was a bit awkward. We were trying to explain what we have in mind. So it was painful, I won't deny. But I think that year of really investigating the problem, trying to understand what are the pain points and what actually to build and co-designing that concept together with clinicians, I think saved us 3-4 years down the line of having to redesign the solution to really address to solve the problem in a proper way. So like really communicating from day one. Another thing I would say is to acknowledge that we do have different mindsets. And instead of being frustrated about it, and we've done our bit, is to really try to put yourself in another party's shoes and understand, okay, the risk awareness of a clinical professional is there for a reason, because they train with a certain steps of surgical procedure that are all important. All their years of trainings, this is what they know. So introducing something new, like a new tool or technology, is a potential risk and hazard. So it's clear that they should feel a bit apprehensive and sort of not trusted immediately. So kind of putting yourself in the other party's shoes and really acknowledge where this is coming from also helps you then design the answers, so-called. For example, what is the language that clinical professionals do understand? They understand clinical studies, they understand clinical trials, they understand the language of patient case series that is published in a peer-reviewed journal. So these are the tools that help you to then provide the information in a way that they understand and then bring sort of that collaboration further. And finally, actually, we discovered that we need to do a lot of education. I don't want to sound patronizing, but again, because the mindset is so different. So things that we as engineers, we take completely for granted. We think it's obvious and trivial. For example, we design our simulations, and the first thing we do is to, of course, measure how accurate it is. Like, is the simulation doing what it's supposed to be doing? Is it representing reality? So you measure, you report its accuracy and all of that. Completely not obvious to a clinical professional. So we almost feel we have to start doing, and we have started doing, and it's a process, to do education to show clinical professionals what good looks like in tools like this, what they should be, what are the metrics, what they should be inspecting, and asking the industry providers like us to demonstrate what set of data, what set of validations, so that they can judge, because they are on the front lines of this. They are the final sort of users. They need to know what good looks like. So education is important. And again, this is also, I think, the very relevant topic of this. I think it's our duty as engineers, not only actually for the whole society, to educate for this kind of new technologies what good looks like.
Thank you so much, Katerina, and it makes me especially happy that we managed to smuggle in a point that's basically about the power of empathy for good AI, right? This is something that I think deserves more attention in the wider debate. And on that topic, we're all here enjoying the delights of the Fringe. Obviously, there are a few folks over at Bletchley today. I would like to know what's the one thing that you really hope emerges from the AI Summit? And I'll just go along the panel. So, John, if you want to kick off.
Yes, I think there is a lot that's already understood by the engineering profession, some of the things that I've mentioned earlier. I'd like to see them grasp that more strongly than they have. They're talking about setting up an institute for safe AI. That really needs to draw on the understanding from the engineering profession that we've talked about today.
Thank you very much, John. Nice and concise. Katerina, what would be your hope?
My hope would be that whatever is discussed and built, the frameworks and tools absolutely needed, but that they are also fit for smaller companies. Because every time there is a new policy or a framework, it's like it's slowing down, and it's kind of almost sometimes an additional burden that is easier for large corporations and large companies because to follow, but it can completely paralyze the smaller players. So my hope is that the smaller, agile startup and SME companies that are the drivers of innovation that are not forgotten, and that they also sort of continue to be very important players in the field going forward.
Great point. Thank you, Katerina. And over to you, Rashik.
Yeah, so I think there's three things I'm hoping for. One is that we absolutely make a step change in professionalism and the importance of professionalism amongst all of the AI community. The second thing is that we surface some standards by which we can work towards, so that kind of coded in Britain as a standard that we can all work towards. And the third thing is that we don't forget that AI is one part of the whole system. And the system is only as good as its weakest link. And so by just focusing on AI, we're forgetting about all the other parts of the system, whether it's an autonomous system, whether it's an AI to support somebody. We do need end-to-end systems thinking here, and engineering has a key role to play in keeping that end-to-end point of view on the whole thing.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all for being so concise and for sharing your insights so generously. I hope that you, our audience, agree with us that there is a great opportunity, and I would argue an imperative, to learn from engineering experience when we think about how we can guide these very powerful technologies that we're now exploring, as well as those who develop and deploy them, towards a future where we all feel the benefits and can do so safely and equitably. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.